They said Sergeant Maya Reeves was too broken for active duty, that her shattered leg and quiet demeanor made her a liability to unit cohesion. But when 400 enemy combatants surrounded Forward Operating Base Sentinel, with nothing but 12 exhausted soldiers standing between them and total annihilation, she became the ghost in the darkness who turned one impossible night into legend. The morning briefing room at Fort Braxton buzzed with the familiar pre-deployment tension until Sergeant Maya Reeves walked through the door on her standard-issue crutch. Conversations didn't exactly stop, but they shifted into something more careful, more measured. The titanium rod in her left leg caught the fluorescent light as she moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned to navigate spaces designed for soldiers whose bodies hadn't been reassembled by military surgeons. Maya settled into her usual seat in the back corner, her damaged leg extended slightly to accommodate the hardware that kept her bones aligned. Her hands rested on a worn leather notebook that never left her side, filled with what appeared to be routine maintenance schedules and equipment inventories. The other soldiers glanced her way with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable sympathy to barely concealed frustration about dead weight being assigned to their unit. Captain Morrison, the company's commanding officer, barely acknowledged her presence as he launched into the day's operational overview. His voice carried the crisp authority of someone who'd never doubted his place in the military hierarchy, never questioned whether his body or his circumstances made him unsuitable for combat operations. Maya's fingers traced absent patterns on her notebook cover, a habit she'd developed during long briefings where her input was neither requested nor welcomed. Anyone watching closely might notice the specific rhythm, the way her index finger moved in groups of 3, then 7, then 2, but no one was watching closely. They saw only what they expected to see, a broken soldier whose combat effectiveness had been permanently compromised, whose usefulness to the unit was rapidly approaching zero as deployment dates drew near. Her apartment off base reflected the same understated presence she maintained in the barracks. Clean lines, minimal decoration, everything in its precise place. But hidden details told a different story. The bookshelf held technical manuals that went far beyond standard infantry training. Volumes on urban warfare tactics, advanced demolitions theory, and psychological operations that most soldiers never encountered during their entire careers. Night vision manuals were marked with annotations written in cramped handwriting, notes that referenced combat scenarios and enemy engagement patterns that seemed almost impossibly complex. In her bedroom closet, behind rows of civilian clothes and standard-issue uniforms, hung a combat vest that was different from the others. Older, more worn, with fabric that showed the kind of stress patterns that came from extended operations in hostile territory. The name tape had been carefully removed, but faint outlines remained where letters had once been stitched. Maya's morning routine never varied. She woke at exactly 0445 hours, though she was always conscious before her alarm sounded. Black coffee, no sugar. Whole grain toast with peanut butter, and a careful review of weather conditions and intelligence reports that seemed far more detailed than what standard personnel typically received. She drove to base in a practical sedan, the radio tuned to military frequencies, where she listened to operational chatter with the focused attention of someone who understood the significance of seemingly routine communications. Her modified fitness routine accommodated her injury while maintaining capabilities that surprised medical personnel during routine evaluations. At the base medical facility, Dr. Jennifer Walsh conducted Maya's weekly physical therapy sessions with growing curiosity about her patient's remarkable adaptation to her disability. Maya's upper body strength had increased dramatically since her injury, compensating for her mobility limitations in ways that suggested systematic training rather than random recovery. "Your range of motion is excellent," Dr. Walsh said during one appointment, reviewing Maya's progress charts. "But your muscle development patterns are unusual. Most patients with your injury profile don't achieve this level of functional strength." Maya's response was characteristically brief. "Adaptation is survival, Doc. You work with what you have." Dr. Walsh had been a military physician for 8 years, long enough to recognize when someone was carrying psychological weight that extended beyond physical trauma. Maya's medical file contained standard information about her injury sustained during a classified operation. But, like many veteran personnel records, there were gaps that raised more questions than they answered. In the base commissary, Maya shopped with methodical efficiency that reflected both her physical limitations and ingrained operational habits. Her cart contained practical items, high-protein foods, everything calculated for optimal recovery and performance rather than comfort or pleasure. Other military families browsed leisurely, children chattering and spouses debating dinner choices, but Maya moved through the aisles like she was executing a supply mission. Private Jessica Torres, a younger soldier who'd recently joined the company, sometimes found herself watching Maya with curiosity mixed with concern. During mealtimes, while other soldiers gathered in loud groups to discuss weekend plans or compare deployment experiences, Maya sat alone reading technical publications that seemed far too advanced for someone assigned to routine base duties. "She's different," Torres confided to her bunkmate one evening. "Not unfriendly exactly, but like she's operating on a completely different frequency from the rest of us. And the way she watches the training exercises when the special operations units are practicing. It's like she's analyzing everything, looking for flaws or improvements that nobody else would notice." The truth was that Maya did see things others missed. When helicopters thundered overhead during training exercises, she could identify aircraft types and mission profiles by sound patterns alone. Her eyes tracked movement with the precision of someone who understood not just how soldiers move through terrain, but why those movements mattered for tactical success or failure. During combat training scenarios that other personnel watched as routine exercises, Maya observed with the intensity of someone analyzing real operational situations. Her injury had forced her out of active combat roles, but it hadn't diminished her ability to read battlefield dynamics with supernatural accuracy. Maya's disability had become a source of quiet speculation throughout the company. She'd never discussed the circumstances of her injury beyond the basic details in her service record, deflected questions about her previous assignments with practice skill, and maintained operational security protocols that seemed excessive for someone relegated to support duties. What nobody knew was that Maya spent her evenings reviewing classified intelligence reports that arrived through encrypted communication channels, materials that required security clearances far above her apparent rank and assignment level. Her laptop was equipped with military-grade encryption protocols and connected to networks that most base personnel couldn't access even if they knew they existed. She studied enemy tactics, analyzed threat assessments from global hotspots, and maintained proficiency in weapons systems that weren't part of standard infantry training. The titanium rod in her leg ached during these late-night sessions, a constant reminder of the price she'd paid for operations that officially never happened, but her commitment to staying operationally current never wavered. Her car's glove compartment contained exactly $372 in small bills, counted and recounted with obsessive precision. The significance of this number, like so many details about Maya's life, remained hidden beneath the surface of her carefully maintained routine. Sometimes during traffic delays on the drive home from base, she'd count the money again, her fingers moving through the bills with ritualistic attention that served purposes only she understood. Captain Morrison's attitude toward Maya had grown increasingly dismissive as deployment preparation intensified. During staff meetings, he assigned her to administrative tasks that any clerk could handle, his tone suggesting that her physical limitations made her unsuitable for anything requiring real military competence. He questioned her ability to maintain pace during field exercises, wondered aloud whether disability compensation affected motivation, and generally treated her as a bureaucratic obstacle to be managed, rather than a soldier with potential contributions. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya endured these slights with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else, but observant colleagues noticed subtle changes when Morrison made particularly condescending remarks. Her jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly, and her hands would move to her damaged leg, not in a gesture of self-consciousness, but with the precise, controlled movement of someone checking equipment before a mission. The company's newest officer, Second Lieutenant Brad Coleman, fresh from officer training and eager to prove his leadership credentials, had begun echoing Morrison's dismissive attitude toward Maya. He made comments about maintaining unit standards regardless of individual circumstances, suggested that soldiers who couldn't meet full physical requirements compromised overall effectiveness, and generally treated Maya's presence as evidence that military standards had become too accommodating. But Private Torres continued watching Maya with growing respect rather than dismissal. She'd noticed that Maya's equipment maintenance exceeded regulation standards. Her knowledge of weapons systems seemed encyclopedic, and during the rare moments when she offered input during tactical discussions, her suggestions revealed depth of experience that didn't match her current assignment level. As autumn settled over Fort Braxton and the company prepared for deployment to a classified location in Eastern Europe, Maya's injury seemed to make her increasingly irrelevant to mission planning. But Maya continued her evening routines, her mysterious communications with undisclosed contacts, and her careful review of intelligence materials that suggested preparation for operations far more complex than anyone realized. What nobody understood was that Maya Reeves wasn't preparing for a quiet deployment to a rear area support role. She was maintaining readiness for the kind of mission that would require every skill she'd developed during operations that remained classified at levels her current unit couldn't access. The night was coming when her true capabilities would be revealed in the most dramatic way possible, when the soldiers who saw only her disability would discover exactly what kind of warrior walked among them. Maya's first formation with Alpha Company established the tone that would define her experience for months to come. As soldiers lined up in perfect rows across the parade ground, her modified stance became impossible to ignore. While others stood at rigid attention, Maya's left leg remained slightly bent, the titanium hardware preventing the locked knee posture that military bearing demanded. The asymmetry was subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes, marking her as different in an institution that prized uniformity above almost everything else. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez called out commands with the practiced authority of someone who'd shaped countless soldiers into fighting machines. His voice carried across the formation like thunder, demanding precision that had been drilled into military muscle memory since basic training. But when his gaze fell on Maya, something shifted in his expression. Not hostility exactly, but the kind of careful neutrality reserved for problems that couldn't be easily solved. "Sergeant Reeves," Rodriguez announced after dismissing the formation, his tone carrying the weight of reluctant accommodation. "Report to Captain Morrison's office for modified duty assignment." The phrase hung in the morning air like an indictment. Modified duty, limited capability, special considerations that set her apart from real soldiers who could meet full operational standards without exception or excuse. Maya acknowledged the order with military precision, but several soldiers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of her situation. In an army where physical capability determined respect and assignment quality, her visible limitation had already relegated her to second-class status before she'd had opportunity to demonstrate any other qualities that might matter for mission success. The company's physical training sessions became daily exhibitions of Maya's inadequacy by conventional military standards. While her squad mates executed perfect formation runs at 6-minute mile pace, Maya completed modified circuits on exercise bikes and weight machines. Her upper body workouts were impressive by any objective measure, but they couldn't overcome the visual impact of watching her struggle through leg exercises that others completed effortlessly. Lieutenant Coleman made sure these limitations received maximum visibility during training evaluations. He would position himself where Maya's modified exercises were most obvious to visiting officers and senior enlisted personnel, ensuring that her different capabilities became associated with reduced unit effectiveness in official observations. "Accommodation requirements affect overall readiness metrics," Coleman explained to junior officers during leadership development sessions, using Maya's situation as a case study in maintaining standards. Individual limitations become collective weaknesses when deployment demands exceed modified capability parameters. His academic language couldn't disguise the underlying message. Maya's presence compromised unit effectiveness, her injury made her a liability, and real leaders would find ways to minimize such problems rather than adapting operations to accommodate them. The younger officers absorbed these lessons with the earnestness of students learning fundamental military principles from experienced leadership. Maya's attempts to participate in tactical exercises revealed the cruel mathematics of military capability assessment. During urban warfare simulations conducted in the base's elaborate training facility, her mobility restrictions became strategic vulnerabilities that enemy forces could exploit. She couldn't navigate multi-story buildings with the speed that close-quarters combat demanded, couldn't execute the rapid position changes that kept infantry soldiers alive in hostile environments. The after-action reviews following these exercises became forums for documenting her limitations with scientific precision. Captain Morrison would project tactical maps showing how Maya's movement restrictions had created gaps in fire coverage, allowed simulated enemies to exploit weaknesses that wouldn't exist with fully capable personnel, and generally demonstrated why physical standards existed for reasons beyond bureaucratic tradition. Combat effectiveness depends on every soldier's ability to fulfill mission requirements without exception, Morrison explained to assembled personnel after particularly challenging exercises. Individual limitations affect collective survivability in ways that good intentions cannot overcome. His words carried the authority of someone who'd learned these lessons through experience rather than theory, making them difficult to challenge or dismiss. Maya sat through these critiques with the same stoic composure she brought to everything else, taking notes in her worn leather notebook while colleagues avoided direct eye contact. But observers who knew how to read subtle signs noticed that her handwriting became more precise during these sessions, her pen strokes more controlled, as if she was channeling rising frustration into superhuman focus on documentation that served purposes beyond simple record-keeping. The company's weapons proficiency training revealed another dimension of Maya's complicated relationship with military effectiveness. Despite her mobility limitations, her marksmanship scores consistently exceeded unit averages by margins that approached the statistically impossible. She could field strip and reassemble weapon systems with mechanical precision that impressed even veteran armors, and her understanding of ballistics seemed to extend far beyond standard infantry training. But these exceptional capabilities were overshadowed by her inability to effectively employ those skills in dynamic combat scenarios. What good was perfect marksmanship if you couldn't reach optimal firing positions quickly enough to matter? How valuable was weapons expertise if mobility restrictions prevented effective maneuvering under fire? Her strength seemed academic rather than practical, impressive in controlled environments but inadequate for real operational demands. Private Torres had begun keeping informal notes about the contradictions she observed in Maya's performance and treatment. During one particularly intensive training cycle, she documented incidents that didn't fit the narrative of diminished capability that official evaluations consistently reinforced. Maya's tactical suggestions during planning sessions demonstrated understanding of enemy behaviors and terrain analysis that seemed far too sophisticated for standard infantry experience. Her questions about intelligence assessments revealed familiarity with classification levels and operational parameters that shouldn't have been accessible to someone with her apparent background and current assignment. "She knows things," Torres wrote in her personal journal after a complex multi-day exercise. When Lieutenant Coleman was planning the assault on Building 7, Maya mentioned that the structural modifications indicated probable defensive preparations on the third floor. She was right, but how did she know? The intelligence briefing didn't include architectural analysis, and she never left the command post to conduct visual reconnaissance. Here, these observations accumulated into a pattern that Torres couldn't explain, but found increasingly difficult to ignore. Maya's disability seemed to coexist with competencies that exceeded normal training parameters, creating a profile that didn't fit standard categories for military personnel effectiveness. The company's senior enlisted leadership had developed their own informal assessment of Maya's situation that differed significantly from official evaluations. Master Sergeant Patricia Kim, a veteran of multiple combat deployments who'd earned respect through demonstrated competence rather than rank structure alone, had been watching Maya with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to recognize hidden depths in unlikely places. During equipment inspections, Kim noticed that Maya's gear maintenance exceeded regulation standards by significant margins. Her weapons were cleaner than required. Her equipment organized with precision that suggested obsessive attention to detail, and her personal supplies included items that weren't part of standard issue, but indicated preparation for operational scenarios that extended beyond normal deployment parameters. Her kit tells a story, Kim confided to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez during a private conversation about personnel assignments. Look at the modifications to her vest, the extra medical supplies, the communication equipment that's way above standard issue. Someone with her injury profile doesn't typically carry gear configured for extended independent operations. Rodriguez had noticed similar anomalies, but hadn't connected them into a coherent picture until Kim's observations provided context. Maya's equipment suggested preparation for missions that required capabilities she supposedly didn't possess, creating another contradiction in a service record that seemed to contain more questions than answers. The mystery deepened during Maya's interactions with visiting special operations personnel who occasionally used Fort Braxton facilities for training exercises. While most soldiers treated these elite units with the mixture of respect and intimidation that their reputations commanded, Maya observed their activities with analytical detachment that suggested professional rather than amateur interest. On several occasions, Torres noticed Maya engaging in brief conversations with special operations team leaders that seemed far too familiar for chance encounters between strangers. These interactions were always brief and appeared casual, but they carried undertones of professional recognition that didn't fit Maya's supposed background in conventional infantry operations. Maya's medical appointments had become routine exhibitions of adaptive capability that impressed healthcare providers while reinforcing her status as someone requiring special accommodation. Dr. Walsh's physical therapy sessions documented remarkable progress in strength and flexibility that compensated for mobility limitations, but they also revealed physiological adaptations that seemed inconsistent with standard recovery patterns. Your cardiovascular fitness is exceptional despite reduced aerobic training options, Dr. Walsh noted during one evaluation, reviewing test results that showed performance metrics above average for soldiers without disabilities. Your muscle fiber composition suggests training regimens that go beyond normal rehabilitation protocols. Have you been following supplementary fitness programs? Maya's response maintained the same careful neutrality that characterized all her interactions with medical personnel. Recovery requires comprehensive approach, Doc. Standard protocols provide baseline, but individual adaptation determines actual capability. Her answer revealed nothing while acknowledging everything, a conversational technique that Torres had begun to recognize as Maya's standard approach to potentially revealing questions. The approaching deployment deadline had intensified discussions about Maya's role in overseas operations. Captain Morrison made increasingly frequent references to rear area assignments that would utilize her administrative capabilities while keeping her away from forward positions where her limitations might compromise mission effectiveness. These conversations occurred in Maya's presence with the casual indifference of people discussing logistical problems rather than career implications for someone who'd dedicated her life to military service. The assumption that her combat effectiveness had been permanently compromised seemed so obvious to leadership that alternative possibilities weren't seriously considered. But Maya continued her evening routines with the methodical dedication of someone maintaining readiness for purposes that extended far beyond official expectations. Her apartment's hidden equipment cache suggested preparation for scenarios that conventional wisdom insisted she could no longer handle, while her mysterious communications indicated connections to operational networks that remained active, despite her apparent relegation to support duties. The soldiers who saw only her disability were preparing for deployment to what they assumed would be routine peacekeeping operations in a stable region. They had no way of knowing that Maya Reeves was maintaining readiness for the kind of mission that would require every skill she developed during operations that officially never existed, skills that her broken leg couldn't diminish, and that would soon prove more valuable than anyone could imagine. Captain Derek Morrison's office walls served as a monument to conventional military success, achieved through predictable career advancement rather than exceptional accomplishment. His commendations reflected 15 years of steady progression through administrative positions, training commands, and staff assignments that demonstrated competence without requiring the kind of leadership that defined truly exceptional officers. Photographs showed him at various ceremonies and military functions, always positioned appropriately within command hierarchies, but never at the center of operations that tested character under genuine pressure. Morrison had built his reputation on maintaining standards, following regulations, and ensuring that his units met measurable criteria for readiness and effectiveness. His personnel evaluations consistently praised his attention to detail, his commitment to military protocols, and his ability to identify and address performance deficiencies before they compromised mission objectives. These qualities had earned him respect from superiors, who valued predictable leadership over inspirational command, making him the ideal officer for managing routine operations that required competence rather than brilliance. The captain's military philosophy reflected a worldview shaped by institutional training rather than combat experience. He believed that physical standards existed for fundamental reasons that couldn't be compromised without undermining the entire foundation of military effectiveness. Soldiers who couldn't meet full capability requirements represented systemic weaknesses that threatened unit cohesion and operational success, regardless of individual circumstances or alternative contributions they might offer. Morrison's first comprehensive evaluation of Maya's service record confirmed his initial assessment that her continued presence in his company represented a management challenge that required immediate attention. Her injury profile indicated permanent limitations that would prevent effective performance of standard infantry duties, while her psychological evaluation suggested adaptation issues that might affect her reliability under stress. The combination created what Morrison saw as a clear case for reassignment to duties that matched her reduced capabilities. During his private meeting with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez to discuss personnel assignments, Morrison articulated his concerns about Maya's impact on unit effectiveness with the clinical precision of someone analyzing logistical problems rather than human situations. His language remained professionally neutral, but his underlying assumptions about disability and military service emerged clearly through his systematic dismissal of any factors that didn't support his predetermined conclusions. Sergeant Reeves presents multiple challenges for deployment planning, Morrison explained, reviewing her file with the focused attention he brought to all administrative details. Her mobility restrictions limit tactical flexibility, her medical requirements increase logistical complexity, and her psychological profile indicates potential adaptation difficulties that could affect unit morale during extended operations. Rodriguez listened with the careful attention of a senior enlisted soldier who understood that questioning officer assessments required diplomatic skill and compelling evidence. His own observations of Maya suggested capabilities that Morrison's evaluation didn't acknowledge, but challenging command decisions without solid justification could damage his own effectiveness and credibility within the unit structure. Morrison's assessment extended beyond Maya's individual limitations to encompass what he saw as broader implications for military standards and unit effectiveness. He viewed her situation as symptomatic of institutional changes that prioritized political correctness over operational requirements, creating pressures to accommodate personnel who couldn't meet full capability standards for reasons beyond military consideration. The Army's commitment to inclusion creates obligations that sometimes conflict with mission effectiveness, Morrison continued, his tone suggesting reluctant acceptance of policies he found professionally questionable. We're required to maximize the utility of personnel whose capabilities don't match conventional requirements, but we can't allow individual limitations to compromise collective performance standards. His words carried the authority of someone who'd spent years navigating military bureaucracy and understood how to frame personal judgments in language that appeared objective and professionally motivated. Morrison had learned that expressing prejudice through institutional terminology made controversial decisions seem like inevitable consequences of regulatory requirements rather than personal bias. The captain's influence over Maya's daily experience extended far beyond official assignments to encompass subtle forms of social engineering that shaped how other soldiers perceived and interacted with her. His casual comments during informal gatherings established expectations about her capabilities and role within the unit, while his assignment decisions reinforced the message that her contributions were limited to tasks that didn't require full military competence. Morrison's approach to managing Maya's situation reflected sophisticated understanding of how military hierarchies functioned and how authority could be exercised through seemingly routine administrative decisions. He assigned her to duties that were technically appropriate for her rank and experience, but systematically excluded her from opportunities that might demonstrate capabilities beyond his predetermined assessment of her limitations. During company training exercises, Morrison positioned Maya in observer roles that kept her away from active participation while maintaining the appearance of inclusion. He would explain these decisions as practical accommodations for her physical restrictions, but the cumulative effect was to reinforce perceptions of her as someone whose military effectiveness had been permanently compromised by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The captain's treatment of Maya influenced junior officers who looked to him for guidance on leadership principles and personnel management. Lieutenant Coleman absorbed Morrison's approach as professional training, learning to identify and address performance limitations before they affected unit effectiveness. The lessons seemed particularly relevant given Coleman's inexperience with personnel challenges that required balancing individual circumstances against collective requirements. Morrison's mentorship of Coleman included regular discussions about maintaining standards while managing soldiers whose capabilities didn't meet full operational requirements. These conversations served multiple purposes, providing leadership development for the young officer while reinforcing Morrison's own authority and validating his approach to handling Maya's situation. Leadership requires making difficult decisions about personnel who don't fit standard categories, Morrison explained during one of their private meetings, using Maya's case as a practical example of command responsibilities. Compassion for individual circumstances must be balanced against obligations to soldiers whose lives depend on unit effectiveness during actual operations. Coleman absorbed these lessons with the earnestness of someone learning fundamental principles from experienced leadership. Morrison's analysis seemed logical and professionally grounded, making it easy to accept his conclusions about Maya's limitations and appropriate role within the company structure. The captain's systematic approach to documenting Maya's performance deficiencies created an official record that supported his assessment while protecting him from potential challenges to his decisions. Every training exercise produced evaluation reports that emphasized her mobility restrictions and their impact on tactical effectiveness, building a comprehensive case for reassignment that appeared based on objective measurement rather than subjective judgment. Morrison's assessment extended beyond Maya's individual limitations to encompass what he saw as broader implications for military standards and unit effectiveness. He viewed her situation as symptomatic of institutional changes that prioritized political correctness over operational requirements, creating pressures to accommodate personnel who couldn't meet full capability standards for reasons beyond military consideration. The Army's commitment to inclusion creates obligations that sometimes conflict with mission effectiveness, Morrison continued, his tone suggesting reluctant acceptance of policies he found professionally questionable. We're required to maximize the utility of personnel whose capabilities don't match conventional requirements, but we can't allow individual limitations to compromise collective performance standards. His words carried the authority of someone who'd spent years navigating military bureaucracy and understood how to frame personal judgments in language that appeared objective and professionally motivated. Morrison had learned that expressing prejudice through institutional terminology made controversial decisions seem like inevitable consequences of regulatory requirements rather than personal bias. The captain's influence over Maya's daily experience extended far beyond official assignments to encompass subtle forms of social engineering that shaped how other soldiers perceived and interacted with her. His casual comments during informal gatherings established expectations about her capabilities and role within the unit, while his assignment decisions reinforced the message that her contributions were limited to tasks that didn't require full military competence. Morrison's approach to managing Maya's situation reflected sophisticated understanding of how military hierarchies functioned and how authority could be exercised through seemingly routine administrative decisions. He assigned her to duties that were technically appropriate for her rank and experience, but systematically excluded her from opportunities that might demonstrate capabilities beyond his predetermined assessment of her limitations. During company training exercises, Morrison positioned Maya in observer roles that kept her away from active participation while maintaining the appearance of inclusion. He would explain these decisions as practical accommodations for her physical restrictions, but the cumulative effect was to reinforce perceptions of her as someone whose military effectiveness had been permanently compromised by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The captain's treatment of Maya influenced junior officers who looked to him for guidance on leadership principles and personnel management. Lieutenant Coleman absorbed Morrison's approach as professional training, learning to identify and address performance limitations before they affected unit effectiveness. The lesson seemed particularly relevant given Coleman's inexperience with personnel challenges that required balancing individual circumstances against collective requirements. Morrison's mentorship of Coleman included regular discussions about maintaining standards while managing soldiers whose capabilities didn't meet full operational requirements. These conversations served multiple purposes, providing leadership development for the young officer while reinforcing Morrison's own authority and validating his approach to handling Maya's situation. Leadership requires making difficult decisions about personnel who don't fit standard categories, Morrison explained during one of their private meetings, using Maya's case as a practical example of command responsibilities. Compassion for individual circumstances must be balanced against obligations to soldiers whose lives depend on unit effectiveness during actual operations. Coleman absorbed these lessons with the earnestness of someone learning fundamental principles from experienced leadership. Morrison's analysis seemed logical and professionally grounded, making it easy to accept his conclusions about Maya's limitations and appropriate role within the company structure. The captain's systematic approach to documenting Maya's performance deficiencies created an official record that supported his assessment while protecting him from potential challenges to his decisions. Every training exercise produced evaluation reports that emphasized her mobility restrictions and their impact on tactical effectiveness, building a comprehensive case for reassignment that appeared based on objective measurement rather than subjective judgment. Morrison understood that military bureaucracy required documentation to support personnel decisions, particularly those involving soldiers with service-connected disabilities who enjoyed certain protections under military regulations. His careful attention to proper procedures and thorough record-keeping ensured that his handling of Maya's situation would withstand administrative review while achieving his desired outcome of removing her from active duty assignments. The captain's influence extended beyond his immediate command to include relationships with other officers who might encounter Maya during joint training exercises or administrative interactions. His casual comments about her limitations and appropriate utilization shaped expectations that followed her throughout the base, creating consensus about her reduced capabilities that seemed to emerge naturally from professional observation rather than coordinated effort. Morrison's networking within the officer community reflected years of building relationships that supported career advancement and professional effectiveness. His reputation for sound judgment and thorough analysis made his assessments influential with colleagues who trusted his opinions about personnel matters and operational requirements. During officers' club gatherings and informal professional discussions, Morrison would reference Maya's situation as an example of challenges facing modern military leadership. His presentations emphasized the complexity of balancing individual accommodation requirements against collective performance standards, positioning himself as someone wrestling thoughtfully with difficult decisions rather than someone whose judgment might be influenced by personal bias. The captain's approach to handling Maya's situation became more sophisticated as he recognized that direct confrontation might create administrative complications or attract unwanted attention from higher headquarters. Instead, he developed methods of systematic exclusion that appeared reasonable and professionally motivated, while effectively marginalizing her contributions and reinforcing perceptions of her limited utility. Morrison assigned Maya to projects that were technically important, but isolated her from mainstream unit activities where her capabilities might be observed by personnel who hadn't been influenced by his assessment. Her work on equipment inventories and administrative tasks was competent and necessary, but it provided no opportunities to demonstrate tactical knowledge or operational awareness that might challenge established assumptions about her limitations. The captain's patience with implementing his vision for Maya's appropriate role reflected confidence that time would prove the correctness of his assessment. He believed that deployment pressures would eventually force recognition that soldiers with significant physical limitations couldn't contribute effectively to combat operations, regardless of individual determination or adaptive capability. Morrison's certainty about military realities and human limitations made him impervious to subtle signs that Maya's background might be more complex than her current situation suggested. His focus on documented deficiencies and measurable restrictions prevented him from recognizing possibilities that didn't fit his predetermined categories for military personnel classification. The systematic nature of Morrison's approach to managing Maya's situation reflected institutional knowledge and professional experience that made his methods difficult to challenge or circumvent. He had learned to exercise authority through proper channels while achieving personal objectives that might not withstand direct scrutiny, creating conditions that would eventually force the outcome he desired through apparently natural consequences rather than overt discrimination. His confidence in handling Maya's case stemmed from years of successful personnel management and thorough understanding of military systems that supported his decisions. Morrison believed he was solving a legitimate problem through appropriate professional methods, making him immune to suggestions that his assessment might be incomplete or his motives questionable. The stage was set for escalating conflict between his systematic dismissal and Maya's hidden capabilities that neither he nor anyone else in the company suspected existed. Maya's quarters revealed secrets hidden beneath layers of careful misdirection designed to maintain operational security while preserving capabilities that officially didn't exist. Behind standard-issue military clothing and basic personal effects, concealed compartments contained equipment that raised questions about her true background and current assignment parameters. A tactical knife with edge geometry designed for specialized applications lay wrapped in cloth that showed wear patterns, indicating extensive field use under conditions far more demanding than routine infantry operations. Her bookshelf displayed technical manuals that extended far beyond standard military training curricula. Advanced texts on asymmetric warfare tactics, urban combat psychology, and explosive ordnance disposal techniques that required security clearances above her apparent rank sat alongside volumes on battlefield medicine and communications protocols that weren't taught in conventional military schools. The margins contained annotations written in multiple languages, suggesting operational experience in international environments that didn't appear in her official service record. Maya's laptop connected to networks that required authentication protocols beyond normal base personnel access levels. During late evening sessions, she would review satellite imagery of regions that weren't part of current deployment planning, analyze threat assessments for operations that seemed unrelated to her unit's mission parameters, and maintain communication with contacts whose identities remained encrypted above standard classification thresholds. The strange ritual that defined Maya's daily routine centered around numbers that appeared throughout her personal environment with obsessive precision. Her alarm was set for 0445 hours, corresponding to the exact time she'd completed her final mission before the injury that ended her official combat role. Her morning coffee finished by 0627, her departure for base at 0847, and her evening return at 1723. License plate numbers, apartment address digits, and exactly $372 in her glove compartment all contained numerical sequences that meant nothing to casual observers but served as constant reminders of operations that remained classified beyond normal access levels. Private Torres had begun documenting these numerical patterns with the systematic attention of someone trained to recognize intelligence indicators. During routine interactions, Maya would unconsciously trace the numbers 3, 7, 2 against her leg or on available surfaces, the movement so subtle that only prolonged observation revealed its consistent repetition. She does it during every briefing, Torres noted in her personal journal after weeks of careful observation. Always the same sequence, always the same rhythm. It's like she's communicating with herself using some kind of code that keeps her anchored to something we can't see. Maya's equipment maintenance exceeded regulation standards by margins that suggested preparation for operational scenarios requiring absolute reliability under extreme conditions. Her weapons were cleaned to specifications that approached laboratory sterility, her gear organized with precision that indicated familiarity with situations where minor oversights could prove fatal, and her personal supplies included items that weren't part of standard issue but reflected preparation for independent operations lasting far longer than normal patrol parameters. The mysterious phone calls that punctuated Maya's evenings followed patterns that raised questions among neighbors who noticed the regularity of her communication schedule. Every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 2,130 hours, her phone would ring with calls lasting precisely 12 minutes. Her responses consisted of coded acknowledgments that revealed nothing to potential eavesdroppers, but conveyed significant information to recipients who understood the operational context. Blackbird 7, authentication confirmed. Maya would respond using call signs that meant nothing to civilian listeners but caused military personnel who overheard them to wonder about her actual background and current assignment status. These conversations ended with confirmations that suggested ongoing operational readiness, despite her apparent relegation to limited duty assignments. Maya's understanding of current global threat assessments seemed to exceed what standard personnel received through normal intelligence briefings. During casual conversations about international developments, she would make comments that revealed knowledge of classified operations, enemy capabilities, and strategic implications that weren't part of routine military awareness programs. The situation in Eastern Europe is more complex than public reporting suggests, Maya mentioned during one mess hall conversation about deployment preparations. Regional actors are employing tactics that indicate coordination with state-level intelligence services. Standard counterinsurgency approaches won't be effective against adversaries with that level of sophistication and resource access. Her analysis demonstrated understanding of operational parameters that weren't covered in briefings available to personnel at her apparent classification level, creating another contradiction in a service record that seemed to contain more mysteries than explanations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had begun paying closer attention to Maya's responses during tactical planning sessions, noting that her suggestions consistently demonstrated awareness of enemy behaviors and terrain analysis that exceeded standard infantry training. When Lieutenant Coleman presented assault plans for training exercises, Maya would identify potential vulnerabilities and suggest modifications that proved remarkably accurate when scenarios were actually executed. During the urban warfare simulation, she predicted exactly where the opposing force would establish their observation posts, Rodriguez confided to Master Sergeant Kim after a particularly complex training exercise. Her analysis of sightlines and tactical positioning was more sophisticated than what we typically see from staff college graduates with formal education in these subjects. Maya's medical appointments revealed physiological adaptations that seemed inconsistent with standard recovery patterns following combat injuries. Dr. Walsh documented cardiovascular capabilities that exceeded normal parameters for personnel with similar disabilities, while her reflexes and spatial orientation showed enhancement that typically required specialized training programs not available through conventional military channels. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your muscle fiber composition suggests exposure to training regimens that go beyond normal rehabilitation protocols, Dr. Walsh noted during one examination, reviewing test results that indicated adaptations associated with elite military programs. The modifications to your inner ear structure appear to be surgical rather than injury-related. These enhancements are designed to improve spatial awareness and balance under extreme conditions. Maya's response maintained the careful neutrality that characterized all her interactions with medical personnel, while revealing nothing about the procedures that had prepared her for operational environments that officially didn't exist. Recovery requires comprehensive approach, Doc. Individual adaptation determines functional capability regardless of initial limitations. The base's special operations units had begun showing unusual interest in Maya's presence during their training exercises on Fort Braxton facilities. While most soldiers treated these elite teams with appropriate respect and distance, Maya observed their activities with analytical attention that suggested professional rather than amateur curiosity about their methods and capabilities. On several occasions, Torres noticed brief conversations between Maya and special operations personnel that seemed far too familiar for casual encounters between strangers. These interactions were always discreet and appeared coincidental, but they carried undertones of professional recognition that didn't match Maya's supposed background in conventional infantry operations. "The way they talk to her is different," Torres wrote in her journal after observing one such exchange. "Not friendly exactly, but like they're acknowledging someone who belongs in their world. Most soldiers get polite dismissal from those guys, but they treat Maya like she understands things that regular infantry wouldn't know about." Maya's apartment security arrangements extended far beyond standard off-base housing requirements, incorporating surveillance and communication equipment that suggested preparation for threats that normal soldiers wouldn't encounter. Hidden cameras monitored approaches to her building, motion sensors tracked activity in nearby areas, and her computer system maintained constant connectivity to networks that required security clearances above conventional access levels. The tactical modifications to Maya's personal vehicle raised questions among security personnel who noticed equipment that exceeded civilian requirements by significant margins. Her trunk contained survival gear rated for extreme environments, communications equipment that operated on encrypted frequencies, and navigation tools with accuracy specifications that weren't available through normal commercial channels. Maya's fuel consumption patterns suggested regular travel to locations that weren't recorded in her official duty logs, while her maintenance records indicated vehicle modifications that enhanced performance characteristics for off-road operations in hostile territory. The combination created a profile that didn't match expectations for personnel assigned to routine base duties with limited operational responsibilities. During company training exercises, Maya's tactical suggestions revealed familiarity with enemy behaviors and terrain analysis that seemed almost supernatural in its accuracy. She understood cover and concealment principles that weren't taught in basic infantry training, demonstrated knowledge of observation techniques that required specialized education, and spoke about engagement protocols with authority that suggested extensive practical experience. When we were planning the night infiltration exercise, she mentioned specific techniques for avoiding thermal detection that aren't covered in our field manuals, Private Torres noted after a complex multi-day training scenario. Her understanding of how modern surveillance systems work was way beyond what standard infantry training provides. She talked about countermeasures like she'd actually employed them under operational conditions. Maya's reading habits reflected interests that extended far beyond recreational preferences into areas that required professional knowledge and security clearances for access. Technical journals on advanced military technologies, classified studies on psychological warfare techniques, and operational analysis documents that weren't available through normal distribution channels filled her personal library with materials that raised questions about her actual background and current assignment status. The mystery deepened as Maya's colleagues began recognizing patterns that suggested capabilities far exceeding her apparent qualifications and official limitations. Her disability seemed to coexist with competencies that indicated training and experience that officially didn't exist, creating contradictions that became increasingly difficult to ignore as deployment preparations intensified. Maya's evening routine included maintenance of equipment that wasn't part of standard military issue but suggested preparation for independent operations requiring capabilities that her current assignment didn't acknowledge. Night vision devices, specialized communication gear, and tactical equipment that exceeded normal infantry requirements lay concealed beneath layers of operational security that protected secrets about her true background and continued readiness for missions that officially never happened. The accumulating evidence suggested that Maya Reeves represented something far more complex than a disabled veteran struggling to adapt to reduced capabilities. Her careful maintenance of operational security, her mysterious communications with undisclosed contacts, and her demonstrated knowledge of classified operations indicated continued involvement in activities that extended far beyond official expectations for personnel in her apparent situation. Captain Morrison's campaign against Maya entered a more calculated phase as deployment preparations intensified and his confidence in his assessment of her limitations grew stronger. He began scheduling mandatory fitness evaluations during her physical therapy appointments, forcing her to choose between medical treatment that maintained her mobility and military requirements that demonstrated her inadequacy according to his predetermined standards. The timing was deliberate and cruel, designed to create documentation that would support his narrative about declining readiness, while preventing Maya from accessing the medical support that kept her functional within her current capabilities. When she missed evaluations to attend therapy sessions, Morrison documented her absences as evidence of prioritizing personal convenience over military obligations. When she attended evaluations instead of therapy, her performance suffered due to missed treatments, providing apparent justification for his assessment of her deteriorating condition. Sergeant Reeves has demonstrated a pattern of scheduling conflicts that suggest confusion about priority obligations, Morrison wrote in performance evaluations that would follow Maya throughout her remaining military career. Her inability to balance medical requirements with operational readiness indicates adaptation difficulties that may compromise unit effectiveness during deployment operations. The language was professionally neutral and seemingly objective, but it created an official record that portrayed Maya's medical needs as character defects rather than legitimate healthcare requirements. Morrison had learned to weaponize military bureaucracy against soldiers who didn't fit his vision of acceptable service members, using proper procedures to achieve discriminatory outcomes while protecting himself from charges of bias or unfair treatment. Morrison's public humiliation of Maya escalated during company formations and training exercises where maximum visibility ensured that her perceived failures would influence how colleagues viewed her capabilities and character. He would call attention to her modified stance during morning formations, asking loudly whether she needed special accommodation that might delay the entire company's daily activities. "Sergeant Reeves, are you experiencing difficulties that require medical attention?" Morrison would announce across the formation, his voice carrying false concern that fooled no one about his actual intentions. "We can adjust the formation timeline if your condition prevents standard military bearing." The offer sounded considerate, but was designed to embarrass Maya, while forcing her to either accept special treatment that marked her as different or endure discomfort that reinforced perceptions of her weakness. Maya's responses maintained perfect military courtesy despite the obvious cruelty of Morrison's approach. "No adjustment required, sir." "Ready to proceed with scheduled activities." Her voice carried no trace of the frustration that such treatment must have generated, but observers who knew what to look for noticed subtle changes in her posture and breathing that suggested enormous self-control being exercised under extreme provocation. The captain's systematic exclusion of Maya from operational briefings expanded to include training scenarios that might have allowed her to demonstrate tactical knowledge or analytical capabilities that could challenge his assessment of her limitations. He assigned her to logistics and administrative duties during combat exercises, ensuring that she remained physically present but professionally irrelevant to activities that defined military competence. "Sergeant Reeves will coordinate supply distribution during today's field exercise," Morrison announced during pre-mission briefings, his tone suggesting routine assignment of appropriate duties rather than deliberate marginalization. Her organizational skills will ensure efficient resource allocation while allowing personnel with full mobility to focus on tactical objectives. The assignment sounded reasonable and even complimentary, but it effectively prevented Maya from participating in activities where her knowledge of combat tactics and situational awareness might become apparent to others. Morrison had learned to frame exclusion as inclusion, making discrimination appear like thoughtful personnel management that maximized everyone's contributions according to their individual capabilities. Lieutenant Coleman had become Morrison's enthusiastic enforcer, embracing his superior's approach with the zealousness of someone learning professional principles from experienced leadership. Coleman began making public comments about maintaining standards during challenging circumstances, using Maya's situation as an example of how good intentions could compromise operational effectiveness if not properly managed. Individual accommodation requirements must be balanced against collective performance standards, Coleman explained to junior enlisted personnel during leadership development sessions. Sergeant Reeves represents the kind of complex personnel challenge that requires careful management to ensure unit effectiveness while meeting organizational obligations to service members with special circumstances. His academic language couldn't disguise the underlying message that Maya represented a problem to be managed, rather than a soldier whose contributions might have value despite her physical limitations. The younger soldiers absorbed these lessons as professional training, learning to view disability accommodation as bureaucratic burden rather than moral obligation or potential resource that might be utilized differently than conventional approaches suggested. Maya's equipment inspections became opportunities for Morrison to document deficiencies that existed only in his predetermined expectations rather than actual performance standards. He would criticize the modifications to her gear that accommodated her physical limitations, questioning whether adapted equipment met regulation requirements, and suggesting that special arrangements compromised standardization that military effectiveness required. Non-standard equipment modifications raise questions about interoperability and maintenance protocols, Morrison noted in inspection reports that created official records of problems that existed primarily in his imagination. Individual adaptations may create logistical complications during extended operations, where equipment standardization ensures reliable performance under adverse conditions. Maya's gear actually exceeded regulation, cleanliness, and organization standards by significant margins, but Morrison's focus on unauthorized modifications allowed him to characterize superior performance as evidence of problematic deviation from accepted practices. His ability to transform strengths into weaknesses through selective interpretation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how military bureaucracy could be manipulated to support predetermined conclusions. The systematic nature of Morrison's harassment extended to deliberate scheduling conflicts that forced Maya to choose between competing obligations, each choice providing ammunition for his assessment of her unsuitability for military service. He would assign her to mandatory training during her medical appointments, then document her absences as evidence of declining commitment to professional development. When Maya requested schedule adjustments to accommodate both medical and military requirements, Morrison would deny the requests, citing operational necessities that took precedence over individual convenience. His responses appeared reasonable from administrative perspective, while creating impossible situations that guaranteed failure, regardless of Maya's actual performance or dedication. Military service requires flexibility and adaptation to changing operational demands, Morrison explained to personnel who questioned the apparent unfairness of Maya's situation. Soldiers who cannot meet these basic requirements demonstrate unsuitability for missions where lives depend on reliable performance under unpredictable circumstances. His logic seemed sound to listeners who didn't understand the deliberate nature of the conflicts he was creating, making Maya appear inflexible and demanding rather than someone being systematically set up for failure through impossible choices between legitimate competing obligations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had begun documenting Morrison's treatment of Maya with growing concern about potential administrative and legal complications that such systematic harassment might create for the company. His experience with military personnel management made him recognize patterns of behavior that crossed lines between appropriate leadership and discriminatory persecution. The captain's approach is creating documentation that could be problematic if reviewed by higher headquarters, Rodriguez confided to Master Sergeant Kim during private discussions about unit leadership and personnel management practices. Maya's performance in areas where she isn't being deliberately undermined actually exceeds standards, but the official record makes her look like she's failing to adapt to military requirements. Kim had reached similar conclusions through her own observations of Morrison's systematic approach to marginalizing Maya's contributions while creating official justification for her eventual removal from military service. The combination of proper procedures used for discriminatory purposes created legal vulnerability that experienced enlisted leadership recognized as potentially catastrophic for everyone involved. Morrison's confidence in his handling of Maya's situation grew as weeks passed without apparent consequences for his increasingly aggressive approach to documenting her unsuitability. He began making references to her impending administrative separation during staff meetings, speaking about her departure as inevitable outcome of objective assessment rather than result of systematic persecution designed to force predetermined conclusion. Sergeant Reeves' situation represents unfortunate reality that individual determination cannot overcome fundamental physical limitations, Morrison explained to visiting officers who inquired about personnel management challenges. Military service sometimes requires difficult decisions about soldiers whose injuries prevent effective performance of essential duties, regardless of personal motivation or previous contributions. His presentation emphasized compassionate concern for Maya's well-being, rather than acknowledgement that his actions were specifically designed to make her situation untenable. Morrison had perfected the art of appearing sympathetic, while implementing policies that achieved exactly opposite results from what sympathy would actually require. Maya's response to escalating harassment demonstrated psychological resilience that impressed even personnel who questioned her physical capabilities. She maintained perfect military bearing during formations where Morrison drew attention to her limitations, completed assigned duties with precision that exceeded expectations, and treated colleagues with consistent professionalism despite their varied reactions to her situation. But observers who knew how to recognize signs of extreme stress noticed subtle changes that indicated the enormous psychological toll of enduring systematic persecution, while maintaining operational security about capabilities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Maya's sleep patterns had become irregular, her appetite decreased, and her mysterious evening communications showed signs of increased tension that suggested escalating strain on resources that weren't infinite. The numbers she traced obsessively had expanded to include new sequences that appeared during moments of particular stress, as if she was accessing internal reserves through ritual connections to experiences that remained classified beyond normal access levels. The patterns provided psychological anchoring that allowed her to endure treatment that would have broken soldiers without her specialized training and operational background. Private Torres had begun keeping detailed records of Morrison's harassment with growing recognition that she was witnessing systematic destruction of someone whose actual capabilities remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security. Her documentation included dates, witnesses, and specific examples of discriminatory treatment that created pattern evidence of persecution disguised as professional personnel management. The captain isn't just making bad decisions about Maya, Torres wrote in encrypted files that she maintained for purposes that weren't entirely clear even to herself. He's systematically destroying someone who knows things that could be valuable, and he's doing it through methods that look professional but are actually designed to force her out of service before anyone realizes what we're losing. Maya's mysterious equipment maintenance and communication routines continued despite the increasing pressure of Morrison's harassment campaign. Her evening contacts seemed to provide psychological support that allowed her to endure treatment that would have prompted most soldiers to request transfer or pursue administrative complaints that might have provided relief from systematic persecution. The hidden aspects of Maya's background remained concealed beneath layers of operational security that even careful investigation couldn't penetrate, but the accumulating stress of maintaining cover while enduring deliberate humiliation was beginning to show in ways that suggested approaching limits to even extraordinary psychological resilience. Morrison's campaign was succeeding in its immediate objectives, while creating conditions that would eventually force revelations that neither he nor anyone else in the company was prepared to handle. Private Torres had reached the point where casual observation had transformed into systematic investigation, driven by accumulating evidence that Maya's background contained far more complexity than official records suggested. Using her administrative access to personnel databases, Torres began cross-referencing Maya's service dates with historical records of military operations, searching for connections that might explain the contradictions she'd been documenting for weeks. What she discovered in classified deployment archives made her question everything she thought she understood about Maya's service history and current situation. Maya's injury date coincided with a special operations mission in Syria that had been redacted from public records, while her medical evacuation timeline matched reports of American personnel extracted from a classified facility that officially didn't exist. "The dates don't make sense," Torres wrote in encrypted notes that she stored using security protocols far exceeding normal requirements for personal documentation. According to her official record, Maya was conducting routine patrol operations when she was injured, but the medical evacuation reports reference extraction from coordinates that correspond to a classified research facility that was supposedly abandoned years before her injury occurred. Sword Bride. Torres's investigation had attracted the attention of Master Sergeant Kim, whose 23 years of military experience had taught her to recognize when official explanations didn't match observable reality. Kim had been conducting her own inquiries through networks of contacts that extended across multiple military branches and intelligence agencies, using relationships built during deployments that had exposed her to operational classifications above normal access levels. "I made some calls about Reeves," Kim told Torres during a private conversation in the secure communications facility where their discussion couldn't be monitored by personnel without appropriate clearances. "People who should be willing to discuss routine personnel matters become very quiet when her name comes up. That usually indicates involvement in operations that remain actively classified, which means her background is more complex than anyone at company level is authorized to know." Dr. Walsh had begun her own investigation into Maya's medical history, prompted by physiological adaptations that seemed inconsistent with standard combat injury patterns. Her review of Maya's treatment records revealed surgical procedures that weren't performed at conventional military medical facilities, while her current physical capabilities suggested recovery protocols that exceeded normal rehabilitation program parameters. The modifications to her skeletal structure indicate surgical techniques that aren't widely available, Dr. Walsh explained during a confidential consultation with Colonel Sandra Martinez, the base medical commander whose security clearance allowed access to information that raised disturbing questions about Maya's actual background. Her titanium implants use alloys that aren't part of standard military medical supplies, while her muscle fiber composition suggests exposure to enhancement protocols that require specialized authorization. Colonel Martinez had begun her own investigation into Maya's situation, after receiving inquiries from personnel at other installations who seemed unusually interested in her current status and assignment. These contacts came through channels that operated above normal military hierarchy levels, suggesting that Maya's presence at Fort Braxton was being monitored by agencies that didn't typically track routine personnel assignments. "The inquiries about Sergeant Reeves are coming from sources that don't usually concern themselves with individual soldier welfare," Martinez confided to her aide during classified briefings that were automatically recorded for security purposes. "When people at that level start asking questions about someone's current situation, it usually means that person has capabilities or knowledge that extend far beyond their apparent assignment parameters." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had expanded his investigation to include financial records and communication patterns that might provide clues about Maya's mysterious evening routines and unexplained equipment access. His analysis revealed banking activity that seemed inconsistent with normal military salary, while her communication metadata showed contact patterns that suggested ongoing relationships with personnel at classified facilities. Her financial records show regular deposits that don't correspond to military pay schedules, Rodriguez reported to Kim during one of their clandestine meetings in locations where their conversations couldn't be intercepted by standard surveillance systems. The amounts suggest consulting payments or specialized duty compensation that isn't part of normal infantry assignments. Someone is paying her for services that aren't reflected in her official duties. The network of personnel investigating Maya's background had begun sharing information through informal channels that bypassed official reporting requirements, creating a collaborative intelligence-gathering operation that operated beneath the awareness of command authority that might have prevented their discoveries. Their combined findings painted a picture that contradicted everything Captain Morrison believed about Maya's capabilities and military value. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a military intelligence officer recently assigned to Fort Braxton, had noticed Maya during routine security briefings, where her questions revealed familiarity with threat assessment procedures that weren't part of standard infantry training. Chen's follow-up investigation through intelligence databases revealed references to Maya in operational reports that required classification levels above normal access thresholds. Hayes. Sergeant Reeves appears in intelligence summaries related to operations that I'm not authorized to discuss, Chen explained to Martinez during classified briefings that were conducted in facilities designed to prevent electronic surveillance. Her name appears in contexts that suggest direct involvement in activities that remain actively classified, which means her current assignment may be protective placement rather than routine personnel management. The investigation had revealed that Maya's apartment was located in a housing complex that provided enhanced security features normally reserved for personnel whose safety required protection from foreign intelligence services. Her building included surveillance systems that operated independently of base security, while her neighbors were primarily military personnel with specialized backgrounds that suggested the entire facility served purposes beyond routine off-base housing. Maya's medical records revealed treatment for conditions that weren't typically associated with conventional combat injuries, including exposure protocols for chemical agents that weren't used in standard military operations, and psychological evaluation procedures that were designed for personnel involved in deep cover assignments. Her current therapy requirements included specialized procedures that weren't available at most military medical facilities. Dr. Walsh's investigation had revealed that Maya's surgical modifications were performed at a classified medical facility that specialized in treating personnel whose injuries resulted from operations that couldn't be acknowledged through normal channels. The techniques used in her treatment indicated access to medical resources that required special authorization and security clearances that operated above normal military medical protocols. The surgical procedures documented in her file were performed using techniques that aren't taught in conventional military medical training, Dr. Walsh reported to investigators who had security clearances that allowed discussion of classified medical programs. Her treatment required specialists who work with personnel exposed to operational conditions that officially don't exist, which suggests involvement in missions that remain actively classified. Private Torres had discovered that Maya's equipment requisitions included items that weren't available through normal military supply channels, while her maintenance records showed familiarity with weapons systems that weren't part of standard infantry training. Her technical knowledge extended to classified modifications that required security clearances for access to operational parameters. During weapons maintenance sessions, Maya demonstrates understanding of modifications that aren't covered in technical manuals available to personnel at our classification level. Torres documented in reports that were automatically flagged for security review. Her knowledge of ballistics and targeting systems exceeds what standard infantry training provides, suggesting exposure to advanced weapons programs that require specialized authorization. The investigation had revealed that Maya's mysterious communication schedule corresponded to operational briefings conducted by agencies that managed personnel involved in missions that remained classified beyond normal access levels. Her responses during these calls used terminology that suggested ongoing involvement in activities that weren't reflected in her current assignment status. Master Sergeant Kim's contacts had confirmed that Maya's name appeared in personnel databases maintained by Special Operations Commands that tracked individuals with qualifications for missions requiring extraordinary capabilities under extreme conditions. Her current assignment appeared to be temporary placement designed to provide recovery time while maintaining operational readiness for future deployment possibilities. People who work in that environment tell me that Reeves has qualifications that are very difficult to replace, Kim reported to the growing network of personnel who had become concerned about Morrison's treatment of someone whose actual value to military operations remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security. Her current situation is apparently protective assignment rather than permanent relegation to limited duty status. The investigators had begun coordinating their findings through secure communication channels that operated independently of normal base command authority, recognizing that their discoveries had implications that extended far beyond routine personnel management issues. Maya's background suggested involvement in operations that required capabilities Morrison couldn't recognize or appreciate. Colonel Martinez had contacted personnel at higher headquarters who confirmed that Maya's case involved considerations that operated above base command authority levels. Her treatment at Fort Braxton was being monitored by agencies that had significant investment in her continued availability for missions that might require her specialized qualifications. The situation with Sergeant Reeves involves factors that extend beyond normal personnel management considerations, Martinez reported to investigators during classified briefings that required security protocols above routine access levels. Her background includes involvement in operations that remain actively classified, while her current harassment creates risks that have attracted attention from sources that don't typically concern themselves with individual soldier welfare. Dr. Walsh had documented Maya's physiological capabilities in ways that revealed performance parameters exceeding normal human limits, suggesting enhancement procedures that weren't part of conventional military medical programs. Her recovery from injuries that should have been permanently disabling indicated access to treatment protocols that required special authorization. The network of allies investigating Maya's situation had reached collective understanding that they were dealing with someone whose importance to military operations operated at levels that transcended normal command authority. Morrison's systematic harassment represented not just personal cruelty but potential compromise of national security assets that he was too limited to recognize or understand. Their investigation had revealed that Maya maintained communication with operational controllers who managed personnel involved in missions that required immediate response to international crisis situations. Her continued readiness suggested that her disability hadn't eliminated her from consideration for operations that few people possessed qualifications to undertake. The accumulating evidence painted a picture of systematic persecution directed at someone whose true capabilities remained hidden beneath layers of operational security designed to protect both her identity and the missions she might be called upon to execute. Morrison's campaign against Maya was approaching the point where intervention from higher authority levels would become necessary to protect assets that operated far beyond his understanding or authorization to compromise. The emergency alert that shattered the pre-dawn silence at Forward Operating Base Sentinel carried priority codes that indicated immediate threat to American personnel in hostile territory. Captain Morrison received the encrypted briefing at 0347 hours while Maya was completing her routine equipment check in the armory, unaware that circumstances were about to force revelations that would change everything about how her capabilities were understood and valued. Intelligence reports indicated that a classified research facility 30 kilometers from their position had been overrun by enemy forces estimated at full battalion strength, with approximately 40 American personnel trapped inside the compound. The facility's location in disputed territory meant that conventional rescue operations would require political authorization that couldn't be obtained quickly enough to prevent massacre of the trapped personnel. Morrison's initial assessment of the situation reflected his standard approach to complex military problems, focusing on conventional solutions that matched his understanding of available resources and operational limitations. He calculated that his company's strength of 80 soldiers would be insufficient to assault a fortified position defended by 400 enemy combatants, making rescue operations tactically impossible without significant reinforcement that wasn't available within the critical time window. The facility is too heavily defended for direct assault with available personnel, Morrison explained to his assembled officers during the emergency briefing that followed initial intelligence assessment. We'll establish defensive perimeter around the compound and wait for additional units to arrive before attempting rescue operations. Tactical patience is essential when facing overwhelming numerical superiority. His decision reflected sound military doctrine for conventional operations, but it failed to account for factors that operated beyond his awareness or authorization to consider. Morrison's focus on measurable capabilities and standard tactical approaches prevented him from recognizing that his assessment might be incomplete due to assets he didn't know existed within his own command structure. Lieutenant Coleman supported Morrison's conservative approach with enthusiasm that reflected his limited experience with crisis situations requiring unconventional solutions. His analysis emphasized the mathematical impossibility of successful operations against such overwhelming odds, using tactical principles learned in military schools that assumed all variables were known and measurable. 400 enemy combatants in prepared defensive positions represent force multiplier advantages that make assault operations militarily unfeasible, Coleman announced during planning sessions that excluded Maya from participation due to her supposed limitations. Attempting rescue with insufficient personnel would result in additional casualties without improving the survival prospects for trapped American personnel. The young officer's assessment seemed logical and professionally grounded, but it was based on incomplete information about available capabilities and alternative approaches that weren't part of his conventional military education. Coleman's confidence in standard tactical doctrine made him immune to suggestions that unconventional solutions might be possible under circumstances that exceeded normal operational parameters. Maya observed the crisis planning from her position at the periphery of command decision-making, listening to assessments that revealed fundamental misunderstanding of tactical possibilities that existed beyond conventional approaches. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but colleagues who knew how to recognize subtle signs noticed changes in her posture and breathing that suggested psychological preparation for action that transcended official authorization levels. The facility's defensive layout became clearer as additional intelligence arrived through classified channels that provided tactical details about compound structure and enemy positions. Satellite imagery revealed that conventional approaches would require frontal assault across open terrain that provided no cover or concealment, making such operations suicidal for attacking forces regardless of training or motivation levels. Maya's review of the intelligence materials revealed tactical possibilities that weren't apparent to personnel without specialized training in unconventional warfare techniques. Her analysis identified weaknesses in enemy defensive arrangements that could be exploited through approaches that required capabilities most soldiers didn't possess, creating opportunities for operations that seemed impossible using standard military methods. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The compound's Eastern approach offers concealment opportunities that intelligence assessment hasn't fully evaluated, Maya mentioned during planning sessions where her input was typically ignored or dismissed. Terrain analysis suggests infiltration routes that might allow small team operations to achieve tactical surprise against numerical superior enemy forces. Her suggestion revealed understanding of tactical possibilities that exceeded standard infantry training, but Morrison dismissed her analysis as theoretical speculation from someone whose physical limitations prevented practical understanding of operational realities. His focus on conventional approaches made him incapable of recognizing that Maya's assessment might be based on direct experience with successful operations under similar circumstances. The trapped American personnel included researchers and security contractors whose work involved classified programs that required immediate extraction to prevent compromise of national security assets. Their capture would provide enemy forces with intelligence access that could undermine ongoing operations throughout the region, making rescue operations essential, regardless of tactical difficulties or casualty projections. Maya's mysterious evening communications had intensified as the crisis developed, with her phone receiving calls at unusual hours using protocols that indicated emergency operational status. Her responses during these conversations revealed familiarity with crisis management procedures that weren't part of standard military training, suggesting ongoing involvement in activities that operated beyond normal command authority levels. Ghost 7 standing by for activation. Maya had responded during one call that Private Torres overheard while conducting routine security patrols near Maya's quarters. Current operational status permits immediate deployment pending authorization clearance. Her words carried implications that didn't match her supposed assignment to limited duty with restricted operational capabilities. The facility's communication systems had been compromised during the initial enemy assault, preventing direct contact with trapped personnel and eliminating conventional coordination possibilities for rescue operations. Without communication capabilities, standard military operations became impossible to execute safely, creating tactical problems that seemed to preclude successful mission completion. Maya's technical knowledge suggested alternative communication methods that could restore contact with trapped personnel using equipment that wasn't part of standard military issue but might be available through specialized channels. Her understanding of electronic warfare countermeasures indicated experience with situations where conventional communication systems had been compromised by sophisticated enemy operations. Facility communications could potentially be restored using frequency hopping protocols that operate independently of compromised primary systems, Maya suggested during technical briefings, where her input was typically discounted due to her supposed lack of relevant experience. Alternative communication methods might provide coordination capabilities necessary for successful extraction operations. Morrison dismissed her technical suggestions as theoretical knowledge without practical application, but Maya's detailed understanding of communication security protocols suggested direct experience with operations where such alternative methods had been successfully employed under similar circumstances. The enemy forces defending the captured facility had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded typical insurgent or militia parameters, using coordinated tactics and advanced equipment that indicated state-level support and professional military training. Their defensive preparations suggested anticipation of rescue attempts and readiness to counter conventional assault operations. Intelligence analysis revealed that enemy forces included personnel with special operations backgrounds who understood American tactical doctrine and had prepared countermeasures designed to neutralize standard rescue approaches. Their positions covered all conventional approach routes while providing mutual support that would prevent successful penetration using typical military methods. Maya's assessment of enemy capabilities revealed understanding of adversary tactics that suggested direct experience with similar threats during previous operations. Her analysis identified weaknesses in enemy defensive arrangements that could be exploited through unconventional approaches, but her suggestions were dismissed as speculation from someone without relevant operational experience. The time window for successful rescue operations was rapidly closing as enemy forces consolidated their control over the facility and prepared to either execute captured personnel or transport them to locations where extraction would become impossible. Intelligence estimates suggested that rescue operations would need to commence within 6 hours to prevent permanent loss of trapped American personnel. Morrison's continued focus on conventional solutions that required reinforcement created delays that consumed precious time while available options decreased. His systematic exclusion of Maya from operational planning eliminated input that might have identified alternative approaches, but his prejudice against her capabilities made him incapable of recognizing that his assessment might be incomplete. Maya's equipment preparations had begun without official authorization, suggesting that she was maintaining readiness for operations that transcended normal command approval processes. Her systematic checking of gear that wasn't part of standard issue indicated access to capabilities that operated beyond Morrison's awareness or authority to prevent. The facility's layout created tactical challenges that seemed to preclude successful operations using available personnel and conventional methods. Enemy positions provided overlapping fields of fire that would prevent approach using standard assault techniques, while the compound's defensive preparations indicated anticipation of rescue attempts and readiness to counter typical military responses. Maya's technical analysis suggested infiltration possibilities that required capabilities most soldiers didn't possess, creating opportunities for operations that seemed impossible to personnel without specialized training. Her understanding of unconventional warfare techniques indicated experience with missions that operated beyond normal tactical parameters. As the crisis intensified and conventional solutions proved inadequate, Maya's mysterious communications indicated escalating operational status that suggested imminent activation for missions that operated beyond Morrison's command authority. Her careful preparations indicated readiness for operations that would require capabilities he didn't recognize or understand. The trapped American personnel faced execution within hours, unless rescue operations commenced immediately, creating circumstances that would soon force Maya to choose between maintaining operational security and preventing catastrophic loss of life. The crisis had reached the point where conventional approaches had failed, and unconventional solutions would become necessary to prevent disaster that could compromise national security operations throughout the region. Maya's hidden capabilities were about to be revealed in ways that would transform Morrison's understanding of military effectiveness and demonstrate that his assessment of her limitations had been fundamentally wrong about everything that mattered when lives depended on capabilities that transcended conventional measurement standards. Maya's secure phone rang at exactly 0412 hours with a distinctive tone sequence that indicated emergency activation protocols. Her response transformed everything about how the assembled officers understood both the crisis they faced and the soldier they had systematically underestimated for months. When she answered with military precision that carried authority far exceeding her supposed rank, the command tent fell silent as personnel realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Storm Raven 7, authentication verified. Maya spoke into the encrypted device with crisp professionalism that belonged to operational classifications. None of them possessed clearance to understand. Hostage situation confirmed. Requesting immediate authorization for Protocol Silver extraction under extreme circumstance provisions. Her words carried implications that made Captain Morrison's blood pressure spike as he began to comprehend that his assessment of Maya's capabilities had been catastrophically wrong. The voice on the other end belonged to someone whose authority transcended normal military hierarchies, speaking in measured tones that indicated decision-making at levels where individual operations could affect international relations. Storm Raven 7, you are cleared for immediate deployment under classified operational parameters. Rules of engagement are unrestricted. Extraction timeline is critical. How copy? Maya's acknowledgement revealed the scope of what had been hidden beneath her carefully maintained cover for months of systematic harassment and professional dismissal. Copy all. Control. Storm Raven 7, operational in 30 mics. Ghost protocol activated. She ended the call and turned to face the assembled officers, whose expressions ranged from confusion to dawning horror as they realized the magnitude of their misunderstanding. "Gentlemen," Maya said, her voice carrying command authority that made seasoned officers instinctively straighten to attention despite the apparent contradiction between her words and her supposed limitations. "I need immediate access to classified equipment storage and tactical gear that operates above your current authorization levels. This facility extraction requires capabilities that conventional operations cannot provide." Morrison found his voice first, though it carried none of the confidence that had characterized his previous interactions with Maya. "Sergeant Reeves, I don't understand what's happening here, but you don't have authority to override operational planning or access classified equipment without proper authorization from command hierarchy." Maya's transformation continued as she dropped pretenses that had concealed her true nature for months of careful operational security. Her movement patterns shifted from the careful economy of someone managing disability accommodation to the fluid precision of someone whose body had been trained for extreme operational demands that would incapacitate normal soldiers. "Captain Morrison," Maya replied with patience that contained undertones of barely controlled frustration, "my actual rank is Lieutenant Colonel, Special Activities Division. My assignment to your company was protective placement following classified operations that required extended recovery time. Your harassment has been documented and will be addressed through appropriate channels after mission completion." The revelation struck the command tent like an explosion as officers tried to process information that contradicted everything they had assumed about military hierarchy and Maya's position within their unit structure. Lieutenant Coleman's face cycled through expressions as he realized that his enthusiastic support of Morrison's discriminatory campaign had been directed at someone whose actual authority exceeded his comprehension. Maya continued her systematic destruction of their assumptions with clinical precision that demonstrated extensive experience with situations requiring immediate role clarification under extreme pressure. The facility under attack contains personnel conducting classified research that affects national security at strategic levels. Their capture or elimination would compromise ongoing operations throughout this theater and potentially destabilize regional security arrangements. She moved toward equipment storage with the confident stride of someone whose physical limitations had never been the defining characteristic Morrison assumed them to be. Her titanium leg hardware, which had served as evidence of weakness in his assessment, accommodated movement patterns that exceeded normal human capabilities rather than restricting them. My injury occurred during extraction operations from a similar facility 18 months ago, Maya explained, while accessing equipment containers that required biometric authentication beyond normal security protocols. The titanium implants were designed to enhance, rather than replace, damaged bone structure, providing capabilities that exceed baseline human parameters for extreme operational environments. Private Torres watched in amazement as Maya retrieved gear that transformed her from disabled veteran into something that resembled science fiction more than conventional military reality. The equipment included tactical systems that weren't part of standard military issue, weapons modifications that required classification levels above normal access thresholds, and communication devices that connected to networks operating beyond routine command authority. The research facility is defended by approximately 400 enemy combatants with state-level training and equipment, Maya continued while systematically preparing for operations that conventional wisdom insisted she couldn't physically accomplish. Standard assault techniques would result in complete loss of attacking personnel without achieving extraction objectives. Her tactical analysis revealed understanding of enemy capabilities and defensive arrangements that exceeded the intelligence assessments available to Morrison and his officers. Maya's knowledge came from sources that operated at classification levels that made their briefing materials seem elementary by comparison. However, Maya said, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had successfully completed operations under similar circumstances, infiltration approaches utilizing specialized equipment and tactics can neutralize defensive advantages while maintaining tactical surprise necessary for successful hostage extraction. Dr. Walsh arrived in the command tent after receiving emergency medical briefing that prepared her for casualties resulting from operations beyond normal parameters. Her expression showed professional shock as she observed Maya's transformation and began to understand the medical implications of physiological modifications she had documented without comprehending their actual purpose. Maya's equipment preparation revealed the scope of capabilities that had been hidden beneath months of operational security and careful deception. Her weapon systems included modifications that weren't available through normal military channels, while her tactical gear incorporated technologies that required special authorization for access to operational parameters. My infiltration approach will utilize terrain features that provide concealment from enemy observation while allowing penetration of defensive perimeter without detection, Maya explained to officers whose tactical education hadn't included training for operations that transcended conventional military doctrine. Electronic warfare capabilities will neutralize enemy communication systems while maintaining coordination with extracted personnel. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez realized that his intuitive recognition of Maya's hidden competence had barely scratched the surface of actual capabilities that operated at levels beyond his security clearance to understand fully. Her systematic approach to mission planning revealed experience with operations that required precision and resourcefulness that few personnel possessed. Maya's communication equipment connected to networks that provided intelligence updates unavailable through normal military channels. Her tactical displays showed facility layouts with detail that exceeded satellite imagery available to conventional forces, while her threat assessments incorporated enemy capability analysis that wasn't part of standard intelligence briefings. Extraction timeline requires initiation within 47 minutes to prevent enemy execution of captured personnel, Maya announced, while completing preparations for operations that seemed impossible to observers who understood only conventional military limitations. Mission success probability approaches 93% using specialized tactics and equipment that operate beyond standard operational parameters. Morrison stood paralyzed as he watched Maya systematically prepare for operations that contradicted every assumption he had made about her capabilities and military value. His months of systematic harassment had been directed at someone whose qualifications exceeded his understanding by margins that made his assessment appear not just wrong, but laughably inadequate. Maya's final equipment check revealed physiological adaptations that enabled performance under conditions that would be lethal for normal personnel. Her modified cardiovascular system provided enhanced oxygen utilization for extended operations at extreme altitudes, while her skeletal reinforcements allowed survival under acceleration forces that would incapacitate conventional soldiers. Facility extraction will commence at 0459 hours, Maya announced with authority that transcended normal rank structure and command hierarchy. Medical support will be required for extracted personnel, while communication protocols must maintain operational security that protects classified research and personnel identities from compromise. Colonel Martinez arrived via helicopter at that moment, her presence confirming that Maya's emergency activation had attracted attention from command levels that operated far above base authority. Her immediate assumption of tactical command relieved Morrison of responsibilities he was unqualified to handle, while ensuring that Maya's mission received appropriate support. "Lieutenant Colonel Reeves," Martinez said, her tone carrying respect that acknowledged Maya's actual qualifications rather than the limitations Morrison had focused on exclusively. "Your extraction authorization comes directly from sources that require immediate compliance with operational parameters. What support do you require for mission success?" Maya's response demonstrated the kind of tactical awareness that could only come from extensive experience with similar operations under extreme conditions. Her requirements list included capabilities that weren't part of normal military resources, but Martinez's immediate compliance indicated that Maya's mission operated at priority levels that commanded whatever resources were necessary. As Maya departed for operations that would prove the complete inadequacy of Morrison's assessment, the officers who remained behind faced the devastating realization that their systematic dismissal of her capabilities had been based on prejudice rather than professional judgment. The woman they had treated as a burden was about to undertake a mission that few people in the world possessed qualifications to attempt, much less complete successfully. Morrison watched Maya's helicopter disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying someone whose true importance to military operations he had never recognized, despite months of daily interaction. His career had effectively ended the moment Maya answered that phone call, revealing capabilities that made his harassment appear not just cruel, but strategically catastrophic for national security interests he had been too limited to understand. Maya's infiltration of the enemy-held facility began at 0459 hours precisely, with her helicopter insertion occurring at coordinates that placed her 3 kilometers from the target compound in terrain that conventional military wisdom considered impassable for someone with her supposed physical limitations. Her modified leg hardware immediately demonstrated its true purpose as she navigated rocky outcropping and dense vegetation with speed and precision that exceeded normal human capabilities rather than restricting them. The titanium reinforcements in her skeletal structure provided stability and leverage that allowed her to traverse obstacles that would have challenged fully able-bodied soldiers, while the surgical modifications to her balance and coordination systems enabled movement through darkness that bordered on supernatural awareness of spatial relationships and environmental hazards. Maya's approach to the facility perimeter revealed tactical capabilities that existed far beyond conventional military training parameters. She moved through enemy observation zones using techniques that rendered her invisible to thermal imaging and motion detection systems, while her understanding of enemy psychology allowed her to predict patrol patterns and timing with accuracy that seemed almost precognitive. Her weapons systems included modifications that weren't available through normal military channels, incorporating suppression technology and targeting enhancements that allowed engagement of multiple targets simultaneously without revealing her position or alerting nearby enemy personnel. The precision of her equipment reflected access to resources that operated at classification levels beyond standard special operations procurement. Enemy sentries began disappearing from their posts with mechanical regularity as Maya systematically neutralized defensive positions using methods that left no trace of her presence or indication of the threat moving through their carefully prepared kill zones. Her infiltration techniques demonstrated understanding of human behavior and situational awareness that came from extensive experience with similar operations under extreme conditions. The facility's electronic warfare systems proved inadequate against Maya's communication equipment, which penetrated enemy jamming using frequency-hopping protocols that operated independently of conventional military networks. Her ability to maintain coordination with trapped personnel while avoiding detection by enemy monitoring systems revealed technical expertise that exceeded standard military training by extraordinary margins. Maya's first contact with trapped American personnel occurred through communication channels that bypassed enemy surveillance while providing tactical coordination necessary for synchronized extraction operations. Her voice carried calm authority that reassured terrified civilians and military contractors who had been expecting execution rather than rescue from impossible circumstances. "This is Storm Raven 7 conducting extraction operations," Maya transmitted to personnel who had been trapped for 18 hours without hope of survival. "Remain in secure positions until given specific movement instructions. Enemy neutralization is in progress using specialized tactics that require precise timing for mission success." Her systematic dismantling of enemy defensive positions demonstrated capabilities that transcended normal human limitations through combination of enhanced physical parameters and tactical expertise that few people possessed. Maya's modified physiology allowed her to operate at performance levels that would have been impossible for soldiers without similar surgical enhancements and specialized training. The compound's layout presented tactical challenges that conventional assault methods couldn't overcome, but Maya's approach utilized structural weaknesses that weren't apparent to personnel without her specialized knowledge of facility design and enemy defensive psychology. Her infiltration routes exploited gaps in coverage that required understanding of three-dimensional tactical geometry beyond standard military education. Enemy communication systems failed systematically, as Maya employed electronic warfare techniques that disabled coordination between defensive positions while maintaining her own connectivity to operational control networks. Her technical expertise extended to real-time system penetration that required capabilities normally associated with intelligence agencies rather than individual operators. Maya's rescue of trapped personnel proceeded with mechanical precision that reflected extensive experience with similar operations under extreme time pressure. Each extraction followed protocols that maximized efficiency while minimizing exposure to enemy detection, demonstrating tactical sophistication that seemed impossible for individual operations against such overwhelming numerical odds. Her movement through the facility interior revealed physiological adaptations that enabled performance under conditions that would have incapacitated normal personnel. Maya's enhanced cardiovascular system provided endurance for sustained operations at extreme exertion levels, while her modified nervous system allowed reaction times that bordered on supernatural awareness of threats and opportunities. The enemy battalion's attempts to locate and eliminate the infiltrator proved futile against techniques that rendered Maya effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. Her understanding of enemy psychology and tactical doctrine allowed her to predict their responses while maintaining operational surprise that kept defensive forces constantly reactive rather than proactive. Maya's extraction of 43 American personnel occurred over 97 minutes of sustained operations that demonstrated capabilities no other individual could have provided under similar circumstances. Her tactical coordination maintained perfect timing while adapting to changing enemy responses and unexpected complications that would have compromised conventional rescue attempts. Enemy casualties mounted systematically as Maya neutralized threats using weapons systems and tactical approaches that operated beyond standard military parameters. Her precision prevented civilian casualties while ensuring that defensive capabilities were reduced sufficiently to allow safe extraction of all trapped personnel without losing anyone to enemy action. The facility's structural destruction following personnel extraction eliminated evidence of classified research while preventing enemy forces from gaining intelligence access that could have compromised ongoing operations throughout the region. Maya's demolition techniques demonstrated engineering expertise that exceeded normal military training in explosive ordnance and tactical destruction methods. Her helicopter extraction occurred at 0736 hours with all personnel successfully recovered and enemy capabilities completely neutralized through operations that seemed impossible, until Maya proved that proper training and physiological enhancement could overcome numerical disadvantages that conventional wisdom considered insurmountable. Maya's mission debriefing revealed tactical innovations and operational approaches that would be studied by Special Operations Commands for strategic applications in future operations requiring similar capabilities under extreme conditions. Her success demonstrated that individual excellence could achieve results that entire units couldn't accomplish using conventional methods and standard personnel. The extracted research personnel included scientists whose work affected national security at strategic levels, while military contractors possessed intelligence about enemy capabilities that provided crucial advantages for ongoing operations throughout the theater. Their rescue prevented catastrophic compromise of classified programs that could have destabilized regional security arrangements. Maya's return to Forward Operating Base Sentinel occurred amid medical treatment for extracted personnel who required specialized care following their traumatic captivity experience. Her own physical condition remained excellent, despite sustained operations that would have exhausted soldiers without her enhanced capabilities and specialized training background. Captain Morrison waited at the landing zone with expressions that reflected his dawning comprehension of the magnitude of his misjudgment regarding Maya's capabilities and military value. His months of systematic harassment had been directed at someone whose qualifications exceeded anything in his own service record by margins that made his assessment appear catastrophically inadequate. Colonel Martinez's presence confirmed that Maya's successful completion of impossible mission parameters had attracted attention from command levels that operated far above routine personnel management considerations. Her immediate assumption of administrative control relieved Morrison of responsibilities he had proven unqualified to handle through his discriminatory treatment of strategic military assets. Maya's tactical gear revealed the scope of capabilities that had been hidden beneath careful operational security for months of systematic persecution by officers too limited to recognize excellence that operated beyond their understanding. Her equipment exceeded normal military specifications by margins that indicated access to resources reserved for personnel with extraordinary qualifications. The successful extraction of all trapped personnel without friendly casualties represented operational achievement that would be classified above normal access levels, while providing tactical innovations that would influence special operations doctrine for similar future missions, requiring individual capabilities that transcended conventional military limitations. Morrison faced the complete destruction of his career and reputation, as the magnitude of his mistake became apparent to everyone present. He had systematically persecuted someone whose importance to national security operated at levels beyond his comprehension, using disability discrimination to attack capabilities he was too prejudiced to recognize or appreciate. Maya's extraordinary rescue mission became classified legend within special operations communities, studied as proof that individual excellence could overcome impossible odds when proper training met unshakable determination. The 43 lives she saved included researchers whose work would reshape America's strategic defense capabilities for decades to come. Captain Morrison faced immediate court-martial for systematic harassment of classified personnel, his career destroyed by months of documented discrimination against someone whose qualifications exceeded his comprehension. His replacement, Colonel Martinez, implemented new policies ensuring that hidden capabilities would never again be dismissed due to surface appearances or physical differences. Maya's true rank was finally acknowledged publicly when she assumed command of Fort Braxton's new Special Activities Training Division, where her experiences became curriculum for identifying and nurturing exceptional potential that might otherwise remain buried beneath conventional assessments. Her modified leg, once viewed as career-ending disability, became symbol of how apparent limitations could conceal extraordinary strengths. Lieutenant Coleman requested transfer after realizing his enthusiastic participation in Maya's persecution had targeted someone whose service record included operations that had prevented international conflicts. His new assignment involved administrative duties far from operational responsibilities he had proven unworthy to handle. Private Torres earned promotion to sergeant after her investigation skills proved invaluable for identifying personnel whose backgrounds contained hidden depths. Her documentation of Maya's harassment became mandatory training material for recognizing and preventing discrimination against soldiers whose capabilities operate beyond conventional measurement standards. Maya's daughter grew up on base where every soldier learned that assumptions about human limitations often reflect the observer's constraints rather than the observed person's actual potential. Her story proved that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths, and the most remarkable people are those who transform persecution into purpose while never losing sight of what truly matters. If Maya's incredible journey inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of hidden heroes who prove that strength comes in forms the world doesn't always recognize. Hit that notification bell and join our community of viewers who believe that extraordinary people walk among us every day, waiting for the right moment to reveal just how wrong everyone was about what they're truly capable of achieving.